nightmare began on a Tuesday afternoon when the school bus pulled away from the curb and my 7-year-old son, Leo, failed to step off the retractable stairs into the humid afternoon air. I stood on the sidewalk for 10 minutes watching the exhaust fumes dissipate, while the driver avoided my gaze and accelerated down the street, leaving me alone in a silence that felt heavy and wrong. I ran back into the house and grabbed my keys. But as I reached for the door handle, I noticed that the front gate was slightly ajar, despite the fact that I had double-locked it before the bus was even scheduled to arrive. My heart pounded against my ribs as I stepped into the driveway and saw a single, mud-streaked sneaker lying near the hydrangea bushes, which was impossible because Leo had been wearing his brand new blue sneakers when he left that morning. I picked up the shoe and realized it was soaking wet and smelled of stagnant pond water, even though it had not rained in our neighborhood for over 3 weeks. I walked toward the back of the property and found the cellar door standing wide open, revealing a dark staircase that led into the windowless basement where we kept the old furnace and winter storage. Every step I took down those wooden stairs groaned under my weight, and the air grew colder and thicker with the scent of damp earth and something metallic that I couldn't quite identify. I reached the bottom and flipped the light switch, but the bulb flickered once and shattered, leaving me in a dim gray light filtering through the cracks in the floorboards above. I saw a small figure sitting in the far corner behind the water heater, huddled into a ball with his head tucked between his knees and his small shoulders shaking with rhythmic, silent tremors. I called his name softly and moved closer, but the figure didn't respond or look up, and I noticed that his clothes were shredded as if he had been dragged through a thicket of thorns. When I finally reached out to touch his shoulder, the fabric felt like ice against my skin, and the boy slowly turned his head to reveal a face that was perfectly smooth, lacking any features where his eyes and mouth should have been. I stumbled backward and tripped over a heavy wooden crate, spilling its contents across the concrete floor, which consisted of dozens of Polaroids showing me sleeping in my bed from angles that only someone inside the room could have taken. I scrambled toward the stairs, but the cellar door slammed shut with a violent force that shook the entire foundation of the house and echoed through the hollow space. I clawed at the wood until my fingernails bled, hearing a soft, wet scratching sound coming from the other side of the furnace, where the faceless boy had been sitting just moments before. The scratching turned into a heavy thudding sound, like something large and uncoordinated was trying to mimic the sound of a human heartbeat against the metal pipes. I found a heavy wrench on the workbench and swung it at the small window near the ceiling, shattering the glass and allowing a sliver of sunlight to cut through the suffocating gloom. As I pulled myself up toward the opening, I felt a cold, firm grip tighten around my ankle pulling me back down into the darkness with a strength that no child could ever possess. I kicked wildly and managed to break free, scrambling through the narrow window and falling onto the grass outside, gasping for air as I watched a pale, thin hand reach out from the broken glass and retract slowly back into the cellar. That's when I thought it was over. I had no idea what was about to happen next. The story isn't over. Subscribe the channel to continue. I didn't call for help because I was convinced that if I looked away for even a second, whatever was in that basement would find a way into the main house and wait for me in the hallway. I grabbed a heavy padlock from the garage and secured the cellar door from the outside. Then I bolted every window and door on the ground floor while checking the closets to ensure I was truly alone. I walked into Leo's bedroom to find his backpack sitting on his desk, fully packed and zipped shut, despite the fact that I had watched him carry it onto the bus that morning. I opened the bag and found it filled with heavy, jagged stones and a single piece of paper that had my own handwriting on it, detailing a funeral service that was dated 3 years in the past. My mind raced as I tried to reconcile the date on the paper with the fact that I had just cooked Leo breakfast and kissed him goodbye only 6 hours earlier. I heard a muffled thumping sound coming from inside Leo's mattress, a slow and deliberate movement that caused the fabric to bulge and stretch, as if something was trying to claw its way out from the springs. I grabbed a pair of kitchen shears and sliced through the side of the mattress, only to find the hollowed-out interior stuffed with old, decaying school uniforms that all belonged to my son. Beneath the pile of clothes, I discovered a hidden compartment containing a small, battery-operated monitor that was broadcasting a live feed of the very room I was standing in from a camera hidden inside a teddy bear on the shelf. I looked at the screen and saw myself standing over the bed, but there was a small, pale hand reaching out from under the bed frame to grab the hem of my skirt. I jumped back and flipped the bed over, but there was nothing underneath except dust and a single hand-drawn map of our house with red XS marked over every place I usually sat to rest. I ran to the hallway and saw the attic hatch slowly lowering, a thin wooden ladder sliding down to the floor with a mechanical precision that suggested someone had been waiting for me to find the map. I climbed the ladder into the stifling heat of the attic and saw a small chair positioned directly over the vent that looked down into Leo's bedroom, surrounded by empty food wrappers and bottles of water. In the corner of the attic, I found a small, makeshift bed made of stolen blankets, and lying on top of it was the blue sweater Leo had lost a year ago, now covered in fresh dirt. I realized then that the boy I had seen in the basement wasn't a stranger, but a physical manifestation of the grief I had refused to acknowledge since the accident 3 years ago. I looked toward the small attic window and saw a figure standing in the backyard. A small boy in a yellow raincoat waving at me with a hand that looked charred and blackened. I ran down the stairs and out the back door, desperate to reach him. But when I got to the spot where he stood, I found only a deep, rectangular hole freshly dug into the earth. I looked down into the pit and saw a small wooden casket with the lid slightly ajar, revealing the pristine, unmoving face of my son as he looked the day we buried him. I reached down to touch his cheek, and the realization hit me with a crushing weight that I had been living in a delusional cycle, kidnapping neighborhood children and dressing them in Leo's clothes to maintain the lie. The faceless boy in the basement was the latest victim who had escaped his restraints, and the danger I felt was the inevitable collapse of my own fractured reality. I sat on the edge of the open grave and looked at my dirt-stained hands, hearing the muffled cries of the child locked in the cellar. And I finally understood that the person I had been trying to protect Leo from was actually me. One last question. If you were in her place at that moment, would you have done the same? Be honest. What does her choice deserve out of 10? Subscribe now. The best story is coming next.